Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. Check us out at our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast, but please go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe there. It really helps out. It's what I'm emphasizing primarily of late. And listen to the Classical Antiquity Side Quest, the companion podcast, if you will, which we all know is a podcast without end. So go to the YouTube channel for that. Not be disappointed. Just dropped a new episode recently on the topic of late antiquity, but we're not here to talk about that. What we are here to talk about is Duke beating NC State, getting to 7 wins and having a chance to get to 9 wins. And we have a guest who is going to talk about where Duke is as of right now, what this win means, and what to expect the rest of the season, just kind of a general overview of the Blue Devils so far this year in year 1 of the Manny Diaz era. But before we get to that, I have some thoughts about NC State fans who have been calling in to one of my favorite podcasts. You all know I listen to the OG podcast. I think it's great. I have listened to a lot of people call in and trash the Blue Devils, okay, saying NC State should not be losing to the Blue Devils and things like that. And that's why Doeren's got to go. Fine, whatever. You're entitled to your opinion on that. That's great. But the trashing the Blue Devils, I have got to talk about that for a second. You all who listen, you know that I do not talk a lot of smack. I will with North Carolina because that's the rivalry, right? But I don't talk a lot of smack. Much like with Roman triumphs, where the person in whose honor the triumph was held would have someone behind them reminding them of their mortality and how all this is fleeting and could be taken away. I remember what just getting a single win was like for the Blue Devils at football. I appreciate every win, and I know things can go belly up real quick and things can turn around real quick, so I don't talk a lot of smack. However, NC State people who were talking smack about the Blue Devils, who do you think you are? Where do you think your program is? Okay. What have you guys been doing and what have you done? Well, let's just talk a little bit about history here. Okay. Let me educate you all on history as somebody who has a history degree. I think it's important. Okay. Which team holds the longest win streak in this series? That would be Duke. Which team has the largest margin of victory? Well, that would be the Blue Devils. A 75 burger got put up on the Wolfpack, 75-0, 1943. Okay. Who has won the most games in this series? Well, that would be Duke as well. Duke has a 43-37-5 record against NC State. Okay. Now, maybe you all want to talk some smack, you Wolfpack fans, and say, well, hey, we're just a better program. Okay, that's, fine. You've done some things, okay? You have done some things that maybe Duke hasn't. But let's analyze that. Let's look at what matters. Okay? Let's just look at what matters. Okay? When was the last time that you guys won conference championship in the ACC? That would be 1979. When was the last time Duke did it? That would be 1989. Okay. Interesting that Duke has done that more recently than you all have. Okay. That's interesting. But let's not stop there. Okay. Let's just stay on recent history. Okay. You all are talking about how Dave Doeren is 1-3 against Duke. Well, those were some good Duke teams, including this one. Okay. But let's go back a little bit further because Duke's actually won 4 out of the last 5 against you guys. 4 out of the last 5. Now, I know we don't play every year. I get that, but just keep that in mind before you start talking. Okay. But I'm not done yet. Okay. I'm not done yet because here is one of the things that I would like to bring up. Which team was the last to win 10 games in a regular season? Okay. Well, it turns out that too would be the Blue Devils who did it in 2013. Okay. You guys have not hit that mark since 2002 with Phillip Rivers. Great season. Y'all have every right to talk a lot of smack about that game, about that season. Absolutely have a right to do it. That was the last time you got 10 wins. Duke's done it more recently. All right. One other thing. Okay. Let's talk about conference championship game appearances. Because when you subscribe to this podcast, did you see a sign that said NC State has played in the ACC championship game? I'm serious. Did you see that sign? That's right, you didn't, because it ain't there. Because playing in the ACC championship game is not NC State's business. But the Blue Devils have. Blue Devils did it in 2013. Okay? I checked. The Wolfpack and Syracuse are the only two who have yet to make an appearance, with the addition of the three, Calford and SMU, who came in this year. So there you go. But hey, talk all the smack you want. All that stuff about Duke not being a good program, okay? It's broke. It's time for you all to get woke. And just keep in mind, as we've gone through this series of truth bombs, whatever you want to call it, I got to say one thing real quick. This came in from one of my guys on Twitter. My man Diablo89 said, and on the seventh day, God rested and thus created NC State. Now, my next guest has no idea about any of this because I did not say this before we started the episode. One thing that I've started doing now is what I do is I record the intro and the outro separately so the guest doesn't have to sit through that. So this may come as a surprise to him because this was not planned. I lost it today and just had to go ahead and get this out. Okay. But our next guest, you know him. He is a columnist for the. But our next guest, you know him. He works for the News and Observer. He covers Blue Devils football, Blue Devils basketball. He has been on this podcast a ton of times, and he comes back. We try to do it in bye weeks. You know him from the Believe in Duke podcast, and you know him from an appearance earlier this year. And I do want to plug the Believe in Duke podcast because he and Sheldon Williams do a great job. It's very informative, very educational, and you guys should listen to it if you don't already. But you know, of course, who I'm talking about, and that is none other than my good friend, Steve Wiseman. Steve Wiseman, how are you, sir?
I am well. It's been a fun football season for Duke, hasn't it?
It sure has. But before we get into that, you've got some good family news to break with us. So why don't you brag on your daughter a little bit?
Yeah, she passed the bar in North Carolina and was sworn in at a ceremony in Wake County last month. And a couple last week, she started a new job in Charlotte as an attorney as an associate attorney, right? Is that what you call it, entry level
Right,
type thing?
right.
Make sure I got the uh, terminology correct there. At Epperson Law Group. So we're proud of her. Proud of her.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad that's going well. Let's turn back a little bit to the football here, or
Yeah.
entirely to the football. We'll get into the NC State win because now North Carolina runs through Duke, apparently, with football this season.
Right.
Uh, Manny Diaz's revenge tour seems to be going pretty well, although I don't think the Wolfpack necessarily count for that. But regardless, we can talk about that a little bit more later. Let's talk about how the team has been doing overall this year, and then we can get into how the Blue Devils responded to the two-game losing streak in a little bit later. But let's just kind of go through overall, how has the team been feeling about this season?
I think overall, I mean, very good. And they would have wanted to win, 3 games they lost, obviously. They had had SMU beat and had a breakdown in special teams, and the offense, got the ball 3 times in plus territory in the fourth quarter. It could get in the end zone. So that's not all on the kicker, right? You got to, the offense needs to get in the end zone there. But that's, I don't want to get into weeds quite yet on that. But I think overall, the way this team, it's been resilient. And that's something that Manny has talked about all along. And we've seen it now, especially this game against NC State, where you're coming off 2 losses, you're going on the road again. You hadn't won a road conference game since the Boston College win in 2022, which clinched bowl eligibility under Elko. Yeah. For all as well as Duke's played at home, which has been very, very strong, they had not won a road game in the conference since then. So that was a big win on Saturday to go over there and the defense. You've been able to count on the defense all year, and the only time it really failed, was Miami, and that's an elite offense. I'm sure giving up 53 points isn't what you wanted, but there were some breakdowns there. But then they responded well against NC State, and that was what my concern was once the dam finally broke for that defense, once they had a really poor fourth quarter, would they be able to get it back together? And they clearly did. And I just thought it was so symbolic the way the first two plays from scrimmage for NC State were TFLs, and one was a safety, and that's the ultimate defensive play, right? Is tackling the end zone. It really set the it's a cliche, but it set the tone for the game. Like NC State was gonna have trouble getting in the end zone, moving the ball, and so very very strong defense this year, and Malik Murphy's come along and had a pretty good season, so the offense seems healthier now. Jordan Moore's healthy again. So I think the vibes are pretty good. Before we get, we'll get into all the details of this later as we go on this podcast. But I think overall, 7-3, yeah, everybody's really happy with that.
Let's talk a little bit about Murphy's progression. Actually, before we get into that, I agree with you about the defense, although I was less concerned about that unit responding because I felt like the way those guys play, they were not going to let themselves get in a funk or panic or rush or do anything dumb. My only concern was, were they going to be burnt out like we would see in the Cutcliffe years, towards the end of the Cutcliffe years? That was my concern about that unit. But it seems like the last couple of weeks, the offense has found a way to not be perfect, but to be more consistent and to do enough. Can you talk a little bit about how that unit's evolving?
Absolutely. And I wrote about it over the weekend. Like that was Murphy's most efficient game. And I'm not counting games against Elon or that kind of. This is a conference game on the road. There's a different level of play that you had to have there. And he, completed 71% of his passes, didn't throw any interceptions, didn't put the ball in danger at all. So that was a really strong performance against a good defense. NC State has a pretty good defense, and that was a great play by him. Um, Justin Pickett's been out for a couple weeks on the line, so that's a big missing piece. But uh, you know, Murphy's being protected well. They're still not running the ball as well as I think they want to. I think we can all agree on that. That would help. That's a big reason why they were 0 for 9 on third downs against NC State, because they couldn't get a running game going to kind of chip away, make third downs a little easier. But it hasn't hurt them. They've been able to score points. They've been scoring more points lately. But it goes back to Samir Hagens is playing better. They're getting more out of him. Jordan Moore is finally getting healthy again. He had that. It's a shoulder thing he's been dealing with since, UConn came. And he was kind of on a pitch count there for a while. They only had him in for a few plays a game. But now we're seeing, look at the catches he's made the last couple of weeks. That Miami catch with the one hand, and the one was going out of bounds. They're as good a catches as you're going to see by anybody, in college football. And so having him back out there changes the way teams have to defend Duke because he's so good. And so Hagens is doing well. Keyshawn Brown is doing better. They're getting some things out of him. So the fact that Star Thomas has played so well, with Jarquez Moore being out and he's still not, able to play it. That foot injury looked bad when it happened at Northwestern, and it's just not getting better. So anyway, I think you're right that the offense is getting better. I think it's the health of Jordan Moore is a big factor there. And let's not forget, the top two tight ends are lost for the season. And Jake Taylor's playing, and they didn't expect him to do much of anything this year. He was third string, but he's getting a lot more playing time than they thought. He's made a couple of catches. He's helped out with blocking. He's not Nicky Dalmolin, but he's developing and getting a little better and starting to contribute. So things are moving in the right direction on the offense, save the running game.
And I think we also saw Vance Bolliard get a couple of snaps against NC State. So I think that's down to what, number 4. And was he converted from another position? I can't remember if it was him or someone else.
No, Tony Boggs and Will Seiler have played some. They were linemen. Yeah. So they had to bulk up the tight end room with reinforcements from elsewhere. Bulliard just hasn't he couldn't get on the field much last year. I'm not sure. I mean, I just hear he has some he's not playing well enough in practice to get more reps. That's basically what it is with him.
Yeah, the only reason I brought him up was if you're playing your fourth or fifth or whatever string guy, that should tell you, hey, we have injury and depth issues here that
No
are
doubt.
interfering with this. One thing I was a little concerned about because you don't really get great discussion or commentary on the TV, and you don't get the best viewing angles to line up and see what the defense is doing and where the safeties are all the time. Are the struggles running the ball more the lack of being able to have a tight end go over the middle to keep the linebackers honest? Is it just the defense is saying, we're going to take this away from you and make Murphy beat us? Do you have any insight on the challenges of late with running the ball?
Yeah, that is a big part of it. They're teams have said we're going to make you beat us this way, and a lot of times, I think we saw on one of the last drives of the fourth quarter, they'll call it RPO plays, and Malik will throw a short pass. That's technically like a running play. I mean, that's what it's like a running play. They just accept it to pass. So there is some of that going on too, where teams are stacking the line and saying we're going to let him beat us, and you know, NC State tried that and they got burned because he did beat him. Malik did beat him on Saturday with the passing game. He spread the ball around quite a bit. I think I can't remember if there was 7 or 8 or 9 guys caught passes that day. It
He
was a
threw
lot.
some of the best deep balls we've seen all season.
Yeah, yeah. And that catch, in the end zone, Jordan Moore had was again tremendous catch. So yes, that is I think what the deal is people are taking away the run, so they're turning to other things.
So one thing that I thought was interesting is Murphy has started to, a little bit to run the ball more, but we also saw a Grayson Loftus appearance, clearly trying to keep the red shirt for next season. But uh, I wonder if that is going to be something that we see more of, just something either from him or Beelan to surprise the other team. Do you have any intel
Yeah,
on that you can share?
yeah. We are to the point of the season now that he can play. It doesn't affect his red shirt. He's already used. He's already got the year booked. Banked, I should say. So, yeah, you can mix him in there a little bit and do it that way. It is interesting that Malik Murphy ran for a touchdown, right? We hadn't seen that.
Ugly run, but it was still a run.
It got it done. He got it done. So, yeah, he says it's first of his career. He hadn't run for a touchdown. And so, um, they called another, they had another running play in that game before that one. There was another one earlier in the game that kind of surprised me. It's like, okay, well, I guess we're to the point in the season now where you can do that. Like if there was a fear of injury before maybe or whatever. Now you've got some depth. You can play Grayson, you can play Henry because it's not going to affect their redshirt situation. So that's all part of how they balance everything.
Well, so let's talk about. I'm trying to think. The kicking teams seems has kind of been off all year. I just haven't really felt particularly confident in that unit. But against Miami and against NC State, that unit seems to have improved and done well. Uh, do you know was that the result of increased attention in practice, just the players determined to do better? Do you have any insight on hopefully what has been a turned corner?
Yeah, because Polino with those you know 50 and 49-yard kicks, that was the big difference in that game against NC State. And Um, he's really only had like the one bad game, Southern Methodist. SMU, he missed the extra point, and that seemed to get in his head. And then he missed the field goal. And then the other one was a blocking thing. Like, that guy, he hurdled the line, the SMU player that blocked the
And
field.
the other SMU player pushed the lineman for Duke down.
Yeah,
If you see it, and I couldn't find that was a rule violation, but that seems like something should be looked at. But anyway, I just
right,
wanted to throw that out there. But go
right.
ahead.
I mean, it was blocked, so it's on the kicker. But that's one where, like, the guy made a heck of a play. But there's a different way to block that, and that's what Manny told us was like it wasn't blocked correctly. There's a way to block to prevent guys from doing that. And so I know against NC State that was something that they focused on was like, okay, because NC State has a habit of ability to do that as well, and they didn't get to them, especially on the long field goals. That's usually where those are blocked because it's kind of a low kick, the trajectory. But um, Polino's had a good year. I mean, again, other than that one game, which cost him, huge upset. And it's hard to set that aside because that would have been that would have changed the season. They'd be 8-2 right now. They'd still be in the you know ACC title race on the edge, kind of thing. But uh, I think overall, yeah, they fixed what went wrong in that game because they've come back and had two really strong weeks in the kicking game.
Let's talk a little bit. We've talked some about the NC State game, but let's just talk about the game itself and kind of the takeaways. I think I remember the first time you and I spoke, it was after a Virginia game where you and I were saying, hey, it wasn't like Duke did anything special in this game. They just came in and just smash mouth beat UVA down and got the win in not great conditions at Wallace Wade. I thought against NC State that it was really a physical game, and it was really a mix of Murphy saying, it kind of reminded me of Goodfellas. There's a line in there where I can't remember who it was owed Paulie money, and the line was, "Oh, you got problems? F you, pay me. F you, pay me." And I just felt like when Murphy was dropping back, he was like, "Okay, I'm gonna make the." Or you saw those throws; it was that kind of a vibe. I mean, he had a long of 31 to Brown, of 45 to Jordan Moore, of 17 to Eli Pankel, and Hagen's had 4 catches for just 16 yards, but they were all big. And he just kept finding ways to get the ball to guys. I mean, it just seemed like just a force of will saying we are not going to lose this game. What was your overall takeaway?
Yeah, that's what I wrote about it, how impressed I was with the way he played that game was um, going through his progressions. He had the time. The line did a good job giving him time for that too. He didn't wasn't hurried very much, but he's getting more and more comfortable with these guys, and that's part of what it was. And it's what you would expect this time of year, but you don't always see it. And when they take away the running game, when they do what they do with the defense, he's got to go through and find the right guys to get him open, and he did that on Saturday. And so a really good sign going forward here for the rest of the year with the last two regular season games that um, they don't ask him to go out and win a game with his arm, right? That's not the defense is going to set the thing. You're not going to win a shootout. That's not that kind of offense. Like Cam Ward has to go win a game with his abilities. Duke doesn't ask Malik to do that, but had he not played so well on Saturday, they may have lost that game. It was he was a big factor in it. So that's kind of the way that offense is coming along, and it's just a really good sign the way he's developed that way and gotten more comfortable with everybody out there and how to find people and again look at second and third choices and finding open players.
One of the things that for a place like Duke that's not going to have the same level of depth that, and I guess I should qualify because you all have every team has the same amount of people on the roster, but to a large extent, but the talent level between the twos and the threes is very different at a place like Duke as opposed to some other schools. And that's not knocking those guys at Duke. It's just a reality. But I always feel like at a place like Duke to win, I don't want to just bring out the term complementary football, but I think of it as all three phases of the game have to do enough to win. And Diaz really seems to have found a way, him and his staff seem to have found a way to get the most out of this team. Do you have any insights on what his overall philosophy or approach has been to this group? Obviously, it's defense first, but what the overall strategy is for putting those other units in positions to do well?
Yeah, I mean, and it always comes back to David Feely and the strength coach and all that stuff, and they really feel confident when they go in the fourth quarter of a game that they're going to be the stronger team. And that means a lot. And it's played out most of the time. It didn't work against obviously the three losses. Those games were lost in the fourth quarter or overtime. But for the most part, we've seen them win some games late. We saw them win late. Carolina game was come back, right? UConn, they had to win in the fourth quarter. There's been some other ones. They had to finish it off in the fourth quarter against NC State on Saturday. They were stronger there. So, but yeah, it the defense is where everything begins, and they count on that. When they make decisions about whether to punt or go forward or whatever, they know that okay, it's going to be hard for for an offense to march 70 or 80 yards against our defense is what their thought process is. So you play a little more conservative on offense because you know the defense is going to be able to do that. We saw that in the Florida State game where what they threw for 70 yards, and it was like, oh my gosh, I mean the offense didn't even have 200 yards of offense. But yet Duke comfortably won that game. I know it was only 23-16, but Duke was kind of in control the whole game. And because you knew the defense was going to play so well, that was the type of game you had to play to win that game. So he wasn't afraid to do that. He doesn't have to open it up and say, "Hey, we're going to go." That's the kind of program he's built here, and I think that'll kind of be the way it is going forward. I mean, um, he and Elko have both proven you can build a great defense at Duke, and you can get the defense. It used to be it was hard to recruit defensive linemen. Remember that was always the big. If you think of the years of Duke football, the lines were hard, to have the same talent as other teams, especially on defense. But this year they're mixing in, they're going deep in the defensive line rotation. They're mixing in reserves on opening drives of games to save snaps for guys for later in the game because they feel comfortable with those guys that are out there. And so that's the key right there is that they feel so good about this defense they can build around that, and everything spins from that.
So looking at the depth that I talked about earlier, and you mentioned with the defensive line, there have actually been some guys in the secondary who have stepped up. I forget the name of the gentleman yesterday who had made some big plays, but Stone has come in and played very, very well. Is
Yep.
this the result of Cutcliffe early on was really good, and I think throughout his career he was very good at finding those kind of diamond in the rough players or overlooked players. Is this a result of targeted recruiting, or is it just happenstance? Do you have any thoughts on how that's starting to develop itself?
Duke has always recruited well in the secondary. You mentioned it there. And so that's continued. This year Chandler Rivers is a tremendous cover corner, and Jalen Stinson was back. We knew the secondary was going to be okay this year because so many guys were back that played last year. Look at what Terry Moore's become. He's become a tremendous, and he was a running back, right? That's the guy they switched positions and got him going. And look at that. That's developmental right there. That's all that is. Obviously the kid, wanting to do the work, but like they developed him. And so, you mentioned Stone, who's a kid from Asheville. Um, Kamari Robinson's been playing a lot more lately out there. So they're getting guys ready for future seasons already. And it's such a good sign. You can just see them it's rolling one on top of the other. Because you're going to lose guys off this year's team and you're getting guys ready to step into those spots next year. So you shouldn't have a step back in that world at all.
One thing that came up too that a lot of people were asking about online, and I'm not really sure what happened with this, was Peyton Jones seemed to disappear from the game entirely yesterday. He only had 2 carries, and he didn't seem to be returning kicks. But again, I wasn't at the game, so I couldn't really check that in real time. Uh, was he hurt? Was it just kind of design? I know pass blocking at times has been an issue with him. Do we
Yeah.
have any idea as to what caused him to kind of disappear?
I haven't heard anything about an injury. So it may have just been, the choice of let's go with Star Thomas. Let's do it. Because Peyton played really well at Miami and he's starting to impact the game in several ways. And I do know that you're right, blocking has been an issue sometimes. So it could have been, and I remember seeing Star Thomas pick up some blitzes really well in that state game. And they feel a little more comfortable with him, blocking. So I think that may have been more what it was because I haven't heard anything about an injury with Peyton.
And I think at some points in the game there were like 6 offensive linemen blocking against State. I heard that from the TV folks a couple of times, and that tells you that they seem to be going all in with having Murphy throw the ball to victory, which worked.
Yeah.
All right, so there's 2 games left coming up. There's a chance to get 9 regular season wins. Virginia Tech, never going to be easy. Fortunately, it's not at Virginia Tech, but there's a lot of talent that the Hokies have. And then you've got Wake Forest, which just lost a heartbreaker over the weekend.
Yeah.
Let's talk about maybe what to expect over these next couple of games from the Blue Devils as far as maybe what you expect to see happen and then what the biggest challenges are going to be for Duke to close out this season strong the way we all would like to see happen.
Yeah, I mean, what's good is when they enter, except for Justin Pickett, they were as healthy as they've been this season at the NC State game. And how many times have we said, been able to say that in November for Duke football? Never. I mean, think of all the injuries. I mean, we can just go over the years of all the major injuries, and it's part of the game, so injuries are going to happen. But I think they'll have Justin back for the after this second bye, which comes at a great time. I mean, having two of those in a year is tremendous. So that'll make that line even stronger. Going into that game, and that is going to be the tougher of the two. I think. I know Wake's on the road, but they're not as good a team this year as they have been. They've kind of taken a step back as a program a little bit. Um, they have Carolina this week, and who knows if by the time we get to that last game, if they'll even have a chance at bowl eligibility. If they're already out of bowl eligibility, that'll make that an even easier, you would think, game for Duke. But Virginia Tech has played well at times this year, and then of course they lost that opening game to Vanderbilt, which doesn't look as bad now as it did then, but still, I know they wanted to win that game, and they played Clemson pretty tough on Saturday, and then let it get away in the second half, and so that's never an easy game. That's never going to be an easy game. That's always um, physical, and but I think Duke is built to play a physical game. And we just saw that Saturday at NC State that they can win that game. They can win that way. And if they have a game, if it's like Saturday, they can go out and win a game like that. And so that's very possible. I mean, 9 wins. I mean, I don't think anybody saw that at the start of the year. 9 wins in a regular season. But here we are. It hasn't happened. I mentioned over the weekend in my column. It hadn't happened since 2014. It happened back-to-back years, 13 and 14. Before that, you have to go back to like 1941 to have a 9-win regular season. So this is something to take note of. This is an important accomplishment, and it's right there in their grasp to have it happen.
And to stay on Wake for a minute, North Carolina coming up this weekend, followed by Miami. Uh, the Demon Deacons are 4-5. That could drop Wake to 4-7, which is not where Dave Clawson and company wants to be. And then let's turn to Virginia Tech here for a minute, because the Hokies had high expectations for this season. It doesn't really seem to be playing itself out the way that everybody would like. The team is 5-5. Uh, there's a lot of chatter online about buyouts. There's a lot of chatter about Whit Babcock. There's a lot of chatter that if you root for Virginia Tech and the Hokies, you would not want to be having. Of course, both teams have bye weeks before the next big game. I mean, this kind of feels like it could be a real must win for Brent Pry and company. Am I reading that one correctly?
You are, because again, they don't want to miss a bowl game, and um, if they don't beat Duke, they're going to be 5-6 going into the Virginia game, and that's a rivalry game, and you never know. You don't want it coming down to that. I don't think if you're Virginia Tech. So, but yeah, that is a program that is not on firm ground. It doesn't seem. There's a lot of turmoil. That they're not Virginia Tech of old. They're struggling to get back to that point, and so that's a game where if Duke can get a lead early, that's what you want to do. You want to take away their hope, right? So I think that's the approach Duke has to have, because that's a team that is looking to their cohesion isn't strong. It doesn't appear. And so if you can get ahead on them, I'm not saying I'm not going to use the quit word. I don't think the Q word, but there's some of that going on where it's like, people are already looking at maybe they got an eye on the portal. Is my coach going to be here? Is my position coach going to be here? What's going to happen with this program? So that's a tough situation for a team to be in.
And looking at that team last year, they won close games. The first year, the Hokies lost close games under Brent Pry, but this year lost by 3 to Rutgers, 4 to Miami on very kind of, to stick with the Simpsons, on a very suspicious looking play. A close one to Syracuse in overtime. And the Clemson loss is not terrible, it being 10 points, but it's at home, and Virginia Tech just never really looked that great in that game. So you could say, okay, and I forgot 7 points to Vanderbilt, although, as we agreed, that loss looks a lot better now than it did week one. Maybe you're thinking, okay, let's give them one more season. But I think the folks at Virginia Tech are getting a little impatient, and that's not the situation you want to be in as a head coach. So I mean, look, Duke's got a chance to get to 9 regular season wins, which I got to say this, Steve, you said nobody expected that. Our Richlandia correspondent, my dad, did call 9-3. So
Okay.
Lee Rodeo went 10-2. Dad diverted down from his standard 10-2 prediction. So he's got a chance. And while I do not want to hear him talk about how right he was, if that happens, I will suffer through it this time, because I would love for that to happen. And then what happens in a bowl game, you don't know. But all right, so let's talk a little bit about how this season. I think 8, 9 wins. If Duke loses the next 2, that's going to be disappointing, and that's going to be very unfortunate. But
Yes.
overall, don't you kind of feel like this season is a really good opening statement to recruits about why you should come to Duke, especially the way Murphy has turned it on of late? If you're a transfer,
No, no question. No question at all. I mean, they can go into homes and I mean transfer portal, high school recruiting, whatever it is, with confidence and show, look, this is 3 years in a row of going to bowl games, of being, highly competitive, not that far away from, being in the ACC championship race. It's right there. It's not like you got blown out of those games at all. I know the final score at Miami was 22 points. I understand that, but it wasn't that type of game. Duke was up by 11 in the third quarter. Just like last year at Florida State, Duke was up in the start of the fourth quarter, in that game. So there's there's something going right here. And Diaz has taken over and built on what Elko had done. Whereas, Elko had to turn it around from it was a mess at the end of Cutcliffe, right? For the results. We can talk about why that was, COVID, whatever it is, but it was a mess. And he did it and got it turned around, and Manny has maintained it. And so, yes, if they go 7-5, that will be hard. That will be really hard. That would be a big disappointment. I don't see that happening. I just think they're too much better than Wake at least, and probably Virginia Tech. So, yeah, you're doing things that, again, if you go 9-3 in the regular season, hadn't been done for a long time, 10 years since it was last done, and like 3 times in the last 80 years. So those are all good things that Manny has done, and um, I would think just like it was last year, they brought in talented players as transfers. Malik Murphy, Star Thomas, like the guys on Bruno Fina on the line, Alex Howard has played really well defensively. Kendi Charles has been a starting defensive lineman. That's all been really good. And so uh, they seem to be, we talk about Wake Forest. Wake Forest is not doing well in this era of college football. Whatever's going wrong there with the collective, I don't know, but Duke seems to have it going well because they're getting the guys they want. They're getting talent that's helping them.
but you were saying about Wake there, as far as how it's not utilizing the portal as well, and then Duke's got guys like Star Thomas and Ozzie Nicholas, among others, over the
Right.
last several seasons where it has worked out.
Right. And that's a good sign. That tells you where, again, you're talking about how strong the footing of the program is for Duke. That's another example of they're going out and able to attract the type of players that can help them win. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's the collective's doing its job. That's the number one thing in this day and age of college football. But Duke also has, Fuqua Business School is there. A lot of kids from a lot of those Ivy League kids, like Ozzie Nicholas, um, wants to transfer here and take another year of school and get a great education and play a little more football. So there's a lot of good going for Duke right now. Unlike some rivals like Wake Forest and NC State spent a lot of money in the portal last year, but it hasn't played out for them at all. So again, good stuff for Duke right now for sure.
And I think the Blue Devils have a good pitch if you look at how NC State is in a transitional year. There's some uncertainty around North Carolina. I don't think Mac Brown's going to voluntarily leave. I don't see that happening. I have no basis to say that other that's pure speculation. Don't think that I'm saying something that I have knowledge about. I'm not. That's just my guess. And then you look at what's going on at Florida State. That seems to be a mess. There's uncertainty at Virginia Tech. Oddly, despite having the number of head coaches Duke has had in the last several years, these last 3 seasons have been really good. So Diaz and Nina King have to feel pretty good about that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they've got a good track record here, and boy, it's 3 years ago. It was a mess, wasn't it? I mean, I know I just mentioned that a little bit ago, but it looked like, uh-oh, can they get it back again? Or they're back at this program's back in the ditch, losing 13 ACC games in a row and getting blown out a lot in 2021. But they've done tremendous work. Nina has picked two really good head coaches in those two hires. And, Mike Elko wasn't somebody that we'd heard a lot about, coming into that. It was his first head coaching job, and they found a winner. He's a great head coach. And he's showing that at A&M now, too. And Manny Diaz was ready for his second chance, and he's taken advantage of it.
And it sure seems like he's learned. I didn't really follow what went on at Miami too closely, but one of the things that Joe Giglio has talked a lot about is how Diaz was from the Bowden coaching tree where it doesn't matter how many mistakes or your game plan, you've just got so much talent that talent is you're gonna be able to rely on it when it matters. Not that they weren't good coaches, but his point was it didn't really work for Chuck Amato to do the same thing at NC State.
Right.
And that was his issue with Diaz at Miami. But I mean, it seems like Diaz has really learned and maybe he always had it, but maybe he's more comfortable with it at Duke, but just really seems to be good, at least this season so far, from a tactical standpoint of coming up with a game plan, sticking to it, and making adjustments. And chance to get to 9 wins, man. That's other than Dad, not a lot of people saw this coming.
No, you're right. And hat tip to your dad. I said nobody saw it coming. I was wrong. I'll admit that. He saw it coming. Good for him. He gets all the props. And Lee Radio. But
Yeah, Lee was
but
Lee was a little too optimistic. It turns out,
but
but a field goal away from that, easy.
yes, I mean it's not like it's a heavy lift to be there. I mean you're right there. I mean, but pretty crazy. Um yes, Manny has grown as a head coach. And that's good. That shows, strength and character that you saw what you did at Miami, maybe didn't work as well as you wanted it to. You go to Penn State for a couple of years, you're under James Franklin, tremendous head coach. But you see things, okay, if I get a chance to do this again, maybe I'll do it this way instead of that way. It's not, Miami, again, all about the swag, and we have more athletes than you. We're just going to out talent you no matter what happens. Otherwise, we'll get the personal fouls. Well, that's just part of it. We're gonna stuff it together. Okay, well at Duke, that's probably not gonna be the case. You're not gonna have better. So he knew if he's gonna win here, but he sought this job out. He wanted this job. So, and he knew what he was getting coming into it, and so he knew he was ready to. Okay, I gotta be a different head coach here, and it's really worked. Somebody mentioned the coach of the year candidates, right? Who's gonna be coach of the year? If Duke goes 9-3 as Manny Diaz coach of the year, he'd be a candidate. Have to be. But I think SMU's coach probably, Rhett Lashley, if they win the conference their first year, it's gonna be hard to turn that down. But the point is, Manny's in the conversation, and that's a really good hire by Nina King.
Well, let's hope Blue Devils get to 9 regular season wins. Also, the bowl win would be nice too, but we'll see. A little ahead of ourselves, but 2 games left on the schedule, let's win them both. So, Steve, you know the deal. You get an open mic, and again, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Always glad to be with you, Ben. And we had plenty of coverage of the game over the weekend from Raleigh. I am actually getting on a plane here to go to Atlanta tomorrow on Tuesday, right, for the Duke and Kentucky basketball game. So I know this is a football centric Duke podcast. I get that, and there's a lot of good things with football. Obviously, we're in that point in the season where basketball is starting to take over too. Um, and I have to admit, I will not be at the Virginia Tech game because I will be in Arizona because Duke's playing Arizona the night before, and then I'm going to hop over to Vegas because they're playing Kansas. So I'm getting ready to be on the Cooper Flag train, I guess, if you will, to cover some good basketball. So we're going to have plenty of coverage of that. Doesn't mean the News and Observer will have somebody at the Duke Virginia Tech game. We'll have that covered as well as if I was there. So I'll have somebody in my stead take care of that game because that's an important game for Duke, as we've been talking about this whole podcast. If they can get that one, then 9 wins is right there because that Wake Forest game is very winnable. So important game there. But yes, we've had some great work. At newsobserver.com, coverage of Duke football, Duke basketball, all the ACC. And so please click on there and become a subscriber if you would. I'd appreciate it.
You mentioned the Kentucky game. I was leaving a store on Saturday, and I had my Hellraiser hoodie on. A guy says, "Hey, I'm a Kentucky fan." I said, "Man, look, it's not basketball season in my mind yet. It's still football season. I don't have time to get into both of them right now." So he laughed about that. But I will be at the Virginia Tech game as of right now, unless something changes. So hopefully we'll get some nice. We'll get a great win,
Yeah.
and it'll be win number 8. It's just one away from win number 9. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. I really appreciate it. You are the best at what you do. Everybody learns a ton when you take the time to come on here. I learn a lot. It makes me a more informed fan, and I just appreciate all the work that you do. Please keep it up. It's fantastic stuff. And guys, again, go to our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. You can find us on all the socials at Duke FB coverage. I tried out the game thread on Blue Sky, which I think I'm going to keep doing it over there because it's just a little bit more functional. When I do it on Twitter, I don't know, over the last like year and a half, it's just been a little bit more of a clunky site, and I haven't been able to get out of it. What I used to be able to get out of it, it just isn't really as functional. So I may be on Blue Sky a little bit more. We'll see, but I'll still be on Twitter. But I'm going to keep doing the game threads over there, I think. So look me up on there. Go to our YouTube channel. Our DMs are open on Twitter at Duke FB coverage. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. And of course, you guys can always call the podcast. We're more than happy to take messages. Leave a question, leave a comment. You guys know it'll get on the air, 540-632-0160. Got a big game coming up, not this weekend, but against Virginia Tech. I'm not going to do a Virginia Tech preview game for that, but I will be at the game. I'm bringing my good friend Blacksburg Chris, who, of course, may be the voice of Mac Brown. So we'll watch that game, and I'll tweet out my seat location if you all want to come by. So, hey, guys, even though it's a bye week, still got to say it. As always, go Duke.